Hi, I'm Sheila James Kuehl. Welcome to Get Used to It. Today we're going to talk about adoptions and by extension the legalization of gay families, such as it is, or the failure to legalize gay families and what that's all about. I'm very pleased to have three wonderful guests with me today. The first, Roberta Bennett, Bobby Bennett, who is a certified family law specialist and attorney in private practice in Westwood, and who has been a pioneer in same-sex family adoptions. Welcome, Bobby.
Thank you.
Stephanie Farrington-Domingue, who's the Director of Community Outreach and Education Department at the LA Gay and Lesbian Community Services Center. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Greg Travis, who's a psychologist working with gay men who want to be dads, and is a, I guess we'll call him a surrogacy consultant. All three of my guests today are people who work with us in our community in helping to fulfill our desires to have families, whether by adoption or by surrogacy or by being biological parents and hoping that our partners can adopt. And we want to explore sort of the full range today. Now, why are we talking about this? Well, as I'm sure many of you know, very recently there was a bit of a flap with the Department of Social Services, who had decided that their long-standing policy not to recommend adoptions by same-sex couples was in error, and they were going to change this policy, perhaps because the ACLU was threatening to sue them, since the policy had never been formally adopted. And when Governor Wilson discovered that this policy was about to be rescinded, he issued a directive saying, we're going to keep this policy in place. I don't want gay couples adopting children. And that's, in essence, I think, where we are at the moment. Now, I've said something about this, Bobby, but you're really the expert. Can you tell us what the policy was, how DSS was going to try to change it, and what Old Pete really did?
Well, I think the important thing to realize, Sheila, is that these adoptions are still taking place. All that changed was the procedure by which these adoptions actually happen. And initially, the policy was a little bit different depending on the situation, but the most common situation was the one where one of the parents is already a legal parent and wants to add a lover on, same-sex lover, as the second parent. And we would actually have to, under the old policy, which is now the new policy again, we would have to actually petition the court to make the Bureau of Adoption do the home study, because they wouldn't even do that, which they would do as a matter of course in any other adoption procedure. When they were ordered to do the home study, they went out, they did the study, and they took what is called a limited consent, meaning that I want this person to adopt my baby, my child, but I don't want to give up any rights I now have as a parent. The Bureau took the limited consent, wrote up its report, and because there was no methodology for taking a limited consent, they would say, we find that the adoption is in the best interest of the child, but we have to reluctantly deny the adoption.
And that was their standard policy, and that is the policy that the governor has reinstituted.
That is correct. And in that kind of a policy, the judge, your judicial officer, has the discretion to overrule the Bureau of Adoption. And of course, as soon as the judge heard best interests of the child, technicality, limited consent, I'm approving the adoption. And that's what happened. The new policy did a number of things and got rid of some of these fallacies that were going on to accomplish the goals. One being that we would take a look at the best interests of the child and not the marital status of the parties. That was the first one.
So would that have affected heterosexual couples too?
Absolutely. Heterosexual couples who were not married would then have been allowed to adopt, which they are not now allowed to adopt. Unlimited consents, it actually spelled out as a policy, and remember, this is not law, this is policy, the policy that, yes, limited consents can be accepted. If it's in the best interest of the child to have this child adopted, we will take the limited consent, we will recommend full approval. That was the policy that Wilson found out about, claimed did not go through the proper channels to be instituted as a policy, had it rescinded, which left us with going right back to the old policy, which is where we are now.
Now, I have a theory, as you know, I teach gender and law at a couple of law schools, and I have a theory that the reason that the department was having so much trouble figuring out what to do with these things is, for heterosexual couples, you say to them, look, you can get married. If you get married, we can do a step-parent adoption really easy. We do those. We let the person that you marry, who's not the biological parent of your child, adopt this child, right?
Right.
But with you guys, you can't get married, so we're not exactly sure what to do with you. And it is the case, historically, that a child can only have, legally, one mother and one father. That's the way we've looked at it. That's why step-parent adoptions are an easy shot for us, because we're just adding one of the other sex. But this so-called limited consent is, you've got a mother who's not giving up her rights, and another mother who wants to have full parental rights. And there was no real way for the law to get this and get behind it. I mean, I don't know whether people really understand that you don't have any parents unless the law says you do. I mean, we have families all the time, right?
That's right.
You have a family. You and Diane had 2 children each and raised these children together. Are you a legal family?
No.
Why not?
Because somebody out there in government has determined that they don't want to give any legal recognition to my family. And when you say, am I a family? Yeah, we're a family. Is our family recognized? No, it isn't. So what Diane and I have is basically all of the responsibilities of being a family, and none of the legal benefits. All of the emotional benefits, none of the legal benefits. And by that I mean it costs us twice as much to raise our family in many areas. To health insurance policies, cannot file taxes together. I mean, there are a lot of benefits that would be coming our way if in fact we had some legal recognition as a family.
But you did just participate in an adoption, didn't you?
Yes, we did.
What was that?
Well, that was under the new policy that has since been rescinded by Governor Wilson. And it's a little bit different because this was not this is not the policy, this is not the adoption that I described to you. Neither Diane nor I was a parent to this child. He was our grandson. And the Bureau of Adoptions didn't know what to do with us at all, because here we were adopting. This was the first time 2 women adopted together on the same petition, and we were not married. And I held this adoption up. The new policy came into effect, and I jumped all over everybody and I said, now. And sure enough, it was a very small window period before Wilson just did rescind it.
It's interesting to me because, as I said before, I mean, we have all kinds of families. We are filled with love in our community, and we have children, and we love each other's children, and we raise each other's children. And, well, Stephanie, you have personal experience in this, and also, can you tell us a little bit about I'm interested in our desires to be families, to form families. The work that you do at the center and your own experience.
Well, well, as far as my own experience, I've been in a relationship with my partner almost 9 years, and she has a daughter that's 19 years old. So I've been co-parenting for the last 9 years. And that's been an interesting experience. Sandy and I have talked about adoptions, but we haven't quite gotten it together. I wanted an older little boy that was maybe lost in the system that I could reach out and say, come on, let's go, and offer them a different life, different options than they would probably have. Sandy says, no, you want a baby, and I'm thinking 2 a.m. feedings. I don't really think so, you know, and I know who'd have to do that, and am I so selfish that I don't want to sacrifice my career and all of that to go with the 2 a.m. feeding zone. So that's where we are personally. But I think it's quite interesting what I'm experiencing as I work with the community through my department at the center, is there's a whole new energy around the issue of family, how we perceive ourselves as family. We have several groups that meet at the center. We've got lesbian moms and our children. We've got gay fathers. We've got Maybe Baby for gay and lesbian individuals that are considering parenting. And we've got Just For Us, which are the children of gay and lesbian parents. So there's a whole new energy going on around the issue of family. And then we begin to look at how do we perceive ourselves as family? How do we create our families within the context of our community? So that's a thrust. As a matter of fact, through my Education Advisory Council, we formed a family task force, and they're beginning to do investigations on in relationship to the center. How do we want to create a family space within the center? So as we look at our structure and what we're doing, we start thinking about child-proofing a room and you know, different types of meeting and connections for parents and their children. And so that's really interesting, because several years ago within our community, I mean, it was about party, it was about be out there. The perception is we were single, free, swinging, out to have a good time. And now I find us full circle, really desirous of creating those families and investigating the different options through insemination, adoption, surrogate parenting, and you know, all aspects.
Where do you think this new energy is coming from? I mean, you called it a new energy, although my experience, and I've only been, probably haven't had an awareness really of a community that I could come into for, you know, maybe the last 15 years or so. But it is a growing sense of wanting to not just establish families, because we've always had families. I mean, really, many of us have always had families, but it's more like, it's more of a public recognition of our families.
Absolutely.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it's incorporating our families into the plan. The plan is not just a single lifestyle anymore. It's incorporating that family, because many of us, through previous marriages, find ourselves parents anyway. And then we couple and we're co-parenting. And so it has become a natural course of our lives. And now we are acknowledging it and embracing it and factoring it in the plan.
Well, before I get to sort of the political equation of it, because that's a part that I think is a big part of what I think is going on in the country, both with us and with them, I guess, as it were. Greg, tell me a little bit about your work with gay dads and wannabe dads.
Well, most of my work right now is through a surrogacy agency who has a long track record of doing very successful matches for heterosexual parents, heterosexual couples. And their official policy has been not to have gay dads or single men come to them for a match. But through the diligence of a few people who have been very motivated and keep finding little pathways into the agency, getting an advocate within the agency, they've actually had some very successful, in terms of the dads, in terms of the surrogate moms, in terms of the outcomes of the kids, matches. And they wanted me to come on board to start researching this. As they're sort of doing this, sort of against their quote-unquote policy, they wanted to have some information. What is this thing we're doing? Most people there are very liberal-minded, but they're conservative in terms of the status of surrogacy within California right now.
Now, just to sort of explain what surrogacy means for people who might not have either thought about it or etc. There's obviously when two men are together, they don't have the ability to bear a child.
They are
so they need to find somebody else, a woman, to bear a child for them. And this has been the case with infertile heterosexual couples who have contracted. I mean, we've all read sort of about the wild surrogacy cases, who've contracted with a woman to bear the child and created a whole legal question about whether the contract is enforceable and she can keep the child, etc. But now we have gay men
new application
who want to father and need somebody to at least bear the child and maybe have some of their own genetic material in the child's genes.
That I do in my research, and with gay men who come to me who are curious about being a parent, sort of pre-adoptive questionnaire. Some of the questions I ask is, why surrogacy versus adoption? to sort of to help people start understanding that issue. It's an important one for a wannabe parent to grapple with. And I mean, it's a bigger issue than I can get into right now, but for those who decide to go the surrogacy route, that for whatever reasons they want that genetic tie to their child. I do ask the dads, like, why did you choose surrogacy over this? So from the dad's mouth, it's pretty much, I want to be a dad with my own genetics. They want that extra tie in order to sort of kick in all the fatherly instincts, if you will. Being related seems to be important to a group of men, not to all gay men.
And
it's just a new option that say, it's not readily available out there, but as a few people have persevered, and I would say technology, law, and culture sort of coming together in a way, that's allowing this option for some people.
And so the surrogate mom essentially agrees and mostly probably goes through with giving the child up for adoption. Is that sort of what would happen?
I'll refer more to you for all the legal ins and outs, but what I understand is most moms are selected because they have the willingness and ability to go through with this type of arrangement. It's all open. If you have a gay dad or gay couple, the surrogate mom knows it. It's not a secret from her, at least the agencies that I work with, that's the way, and most reputable agencies are done that way. So it's open, it's understood. And usually the idea is that she will surrender her parental rights, either for the single dad to be the sole parent, or as we were talking about before, now there's this new option of biological dad and his partner both becoming parents to the child.
Is that how it works, Bobby?
Yeah, you're in a unique position, Sheila, because truly Sacramento has got to take a look at some surrogacy laws that make sense, because right now the attorneys are just out there and we're punting all over the place and we don't know what's legal or illegal, and there really isn't enough case law to give us any guidance in this area. But basically that is correct, and recently this wanting to have a genetic attachment to a child is for some people extremely important. Yes. And I just recently did a surrogacy for 2 gay men who both had a genetic attachment. You know who I'm talking about.
They're part of my research project.
To the child. And the adoption judge didn't know what to do with this one at all. So we got consents from the egg donor, and we got consents from the woman who actually carried the child, who was a separate individual from the egg donor. And it gets real confusing, and I did that, but I mean, I didn't have anything to look at. No forms, no law, no guidance, and neither did my judge.
Well, the problem seems to arise just from the legal sense. If the birth mother doesn't want to give up her rights, and she's also the genetic mother. Then we had a case where there was an egg donor, a different birth mother, and the court said, well, the egg donor is the real mother. So the courts are punting too.
Yes,
but beyond the legal question of it, here's the interesting thing to me, because you identified it, Stephanie, I think as well. We used to be a community that was not necessarily interested in having children together in terms of completing our families. We were having children within marriages, both men and women in their heterosexual marriages. Then they would leave the marriage, often the court would find against them and say, you know, the straight parent gets the kids, although in your case that was not the case. You and Diane both kept your kids, but still, that was why you had them. To have to decide to have another one, which is a lot more trouble, within the context of a gay or lesbian partnership. It took us a while to get to it, and yet we did come to it, and there was a great yearning in our community. It's even been called the gayby boom, I think, at the moment. It's almost like we woke up and said to ourselves, why are we denying ourselves children? It's like self-punishment. You know, like we're not good enough to have them or something. Why not? This is a really family thing. So now we finally as a community come to this, but guess what? The rest of the world is now saying, okay, now that you want to form your families this way, this is a very important barrier for us to put in front of you. And we're going to put a lot of barriers in front of you forming your families this way. let me ask you, why do you think they're so adamant about putting these barriers in front of our having families? Family should be a good thing.
I think in a lot of ways we find like parties trying to set themselves up to be the family value parties. And I think that denying us these options, such as adopting, marrying, sticks the wedge in there, and it keeps us less than. If we were allowed to marry, if we were allowed to adopt, we would be in essence equal. And there would be no heterosexual privilege. And this is what they're fighting, to drive that wedge in there, because they do not want to give us our civil rights. They do not want to give us our equality. We are not supposed to be privy, thank you, to the full rights and responsibilities. And you spoke about that earlier, that we had all the responsibilities and none of the rights. And I think as a community we're really waking up and moving towards our rights. And when you even talk about surrogate parenting and having that genetic connection, there's a perception of a different right to that child, a different right to your family unit when you approach it that way.
This is not the first group in history that's been denied legal recognition of their families as an aspect. I mean, it was stunning to me when I realized in the course of teaching a class that was the case. Of course, because I'm not African American, it didn't occur to me right off like it should have. But slaves, of course, were denied the ability to marry.
Right.
Their families were just broken up. As though, why?
Right.
They weren't human. Why weren't they human? Because they couldn't marry. I mean, it sort of makes this enormous circle. Am I making a specious comparison? Or
no, I think so. And if we look further, there was a time when Japanese Americans and Chinese Americans were not allowed to marry.
Really?
So withholding, they're less than. You don't have the right to. And that works on your psyche. And look at what you do to an individual that you don't allow to have their full expression of who they are. You know, and to even think about themselves as being an equal, or to embrace the rights that we supposedly have in this country. So once again, driving the stake. There's this great feeling in America, or as our system perpetuates, that someone's got to be up here and somebody's got to be down here. So this is another way of making us, that throwaway population of individuals, the less than, and making the distinctions and keeping us down here.
And it's sort of one of those things where when you're a kid, let's say you're newly beginning to figure out that you're gay, all of the horrible things about being gay come into your sort of lack of self-esteem. I mean, and one of them must be, well, gosh, now I guess I can never have a family. Is that what you find with...
Well, that's what I was reflecting before about when I started counselor training 15 years ago. At the time, very compassionate gay supervisors were telling me, when you're dealing with clients coming into the office, into my office, well, of course, you're going to be seeing a lot of grief from a lot of men or women that they're going to be giving up their role or potential role as being a parent. And that was considered very progressive 15 years ago.
Just to be recognizing that that grief was appropriate, because of course they were giving up such a role.
And that was, you can talk about the developmental stages of, say, the huge gay and lesbian movement from the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and et cetera. And maybe that was developmentally understandable, but now I have young men coming into my practice, early 20s, and of course, they know the option of being a dad is there. It's just such a difference in 15 years. And here I am actively involved with gay men wanting to be dads, exploring those options. Before it was, as you mentioned, a lot of men who were perhaps closeted or in marriages didn't understand their sexual orientation became dads and then came out. And those men have a lot of issues and concerns too, but there's this whole new generation of men who are openly gay, who are out, and now they want to become dads. And they're just, it seems like a real groundswell of movement for lesbians and gay men right now.
I think we have a different perception of ourselves. You know, when we talk about people that were in heterosexual marriages, found out about their orientation, but had children within the context of that marriage, and then you look at the dynamics of how they were as a parent, because generally the heterosexual person kept the child, and this gay father or mother was banished to a single world. But now we are embracing that relationship with our offsprings. So it's just a different awareness about ourselves and getting in touch with our own wants and desires to parent.
Still, there's that mythology. Don't you find that I mean, new people in the community don't get it right away, I don't think, that they are going to be able to be parents. Maybe
That's because they don't understand the politics. And if you take a look at our community, we are coming into our own. We are starting to grow up. And as we have grown up, and as we have started not to believe in what we are being told in many cases, and when the American Psychiatric Association said, well, maybe they are healthy,
or maybe they are not sick.
Or maybe they are not sick, right? I think we have come to recognize that we are just as good as, we are just as capable of raising healthy children. We have just as much love to give. And as we are coming to grips with that as a community and understanding it, then we do want those things. I think there were a lot of us initially, if you want to talk, let's go back, I'm older, more than 15 years. I think there were a lot of men and women out there, part of our community, that really explored having children but were afraid to. They were afraid to because they bought into where society was at that point in time, and where society was is you couldn't possibly raise healthy children who are not going to be scarred by this. Well, we no longer believe that. And not only do we no longer believe that, I think there is a growing percentage of heterosexuals, mental health professionals, legislators, people who can truly make a difference, who also believe that. Well, and things are going to change.
Hold that thought, because I want to come back after the break and talk about, enter right back into that discussion about the attitude of our community about people who had kids 15 years ago. Don't go away, we'll be right back.
No matter how educational it is, no matter how technologically advanced it may be, no matter what you put in front of your kids to help them succeed, it just doesn't mean a thing unless you're right there behind them. Join America's principals in helping students succeed. Call your kid's school today.
Hi, welcome back to Get Used to It. I'm Sheila Kuehl, and today, as I hope you already know, we're talking about adoption in our gay and lesbian community, and by extension, our ability to form families. We'll probably be talking about marriage, and I don't know what all we'll be talking about, because we've got three wonderful guests. Roberta Bennett, who's an attorney, certified family law specialist, and a pioneer in same-sex couple adoptions. Really a divorce attorney, but we'll talk about the gay stuff today. Stephanie Farrington-Domingue, who is the Director of Community Outreach at the Gay and Lesbian Community Services Center in LA, and Dr. Greg Travis, who works with gay male fathers and wannabe fathers and men who want to participate in surrogate parenting. Is that what we call it, I guess? So welcome back, welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about, what were we talking about?
We were talking about how as the community comes more into its own, we are willing to get out there and explore areas we were not willing to explore before, such as having children.
Well, but I remember 15 years ago, there was kind of an antagonism in much of the lesbian community toward lesbian moms. Women who already had kids, there was no child care anywhere. It was kind of anti-feminist in a way. I went to a conference in Orange County 400 lesbian moms showed up, and their main complaint was there was no support in the community. They were being called breeders. God forbid they should want to have children if they didn't already have them. Did you find anything like that, or?
To be honest, we really didn't, because Diane and I created such a wonderful network of extended family in the gay and lesbian community that we didn't encounter much of that. And of course, our extended family were men and women who welcomed our 4 children into their lives. But I think that if you take a look at what was happening 10 years ago, 15 years, 20 years ago, most of the children came from heterosexual unions, and there were divorces. So there was already some amount of distrust, not so sure, from the young woman who had never been with a man. And yes, there was the, breeder, we don't know what you are, but you can't be a lesbian because you have children. Mm-hmm. It was almost that mentality, mm-hmm. and there was almost that belief system out there.
Also, I think we were trying to differentiate ourselves a lot from heterosexuals. I mean, we didn't have a separate gay or lesbian identity, really, that we understood. And one of the ways that we were trying to do that was, well, I'm not going to be one of them. I'm not sure what I am, but I'm not that. And I think that was something that took us a while to kind of come out of again, maybe as an aspect of the maturation of the community.
Well, I think that that's true, and now we're talking about the rights to marry. And again, if you want to talk about any system that has truly failed the heterosexual community in many, many ways, marriage is it. And yet, I take a look at it, I'm a divorce attorney, if marriages are recognized in our community, I'm really going to be very rich. and the reason I'm going to be very rich is because such a high percentage of these unions do not work. And I don't expect that percentage to really be any higher or any lower in the gay and lesbian
community. So we'll just
community.
have more divorces.
We'll have more marriages, we'll have more divorces, and we'll have more children being separated in some fashion and shared between 2 parents, whether they're parents of the same sex or different.
You hear that discussion within our community too about, well, this is a heterosexual system that has surely failed them, and why are we buying into that? Why are we even concerned? But then it goes further. It's about our rights, our basic civil rights, that should we choose to enter into this relationship, we should have the right to do that. And what we're talking about are really legal marriages. Not so much the religious ceremonial thing that gets superimposed on it, but pristine legal marriages, legal unions.
Well, it's so freighted with symbolism. I mean, the whole thing we were talking about having children, it was weighted with symbolism. You had somehow become tainted by the heterosexual something or other. You'd been in that marriage and you had children. And that was part of the reason why, in the old days, people were, that's that, and we're us, and we're different, and we're going to be different. I mean, the men were certainly far more different.
Well, and also in the olden days, we did not embrace our visibility. There's a big change in how we look at ourselves and want to express ourselves and take our space. Whereas 20, 30 years ago, it was completely different. And when I look at connecting elders in our gay and lesbian community, they lived a closeted lifestyle that is so unfamiliar to many of us today. So I have a problem in connecting and bringing them into the gay and lesbian center with banners and a triangle on the front of the building, and that puts parameters on them that are very uncomfortable to them. So you used a phrase, you said, well, when Diane and I made friends, or we did this. So your friends found you as a unit already.
That's correct.
And that's one way of family. Now we have young, independent lesbian and gay men who are seeking what their options are going to be, and seeking out their own definition of themselves and what their families will be. So it's a little different, and then we clump it all into the greater gay and lesbian experience. But we're at different and varying points on this continuum of what we are to be and what we are as family. So there's a lot of, we hear the conversation about breeders, and it's almost as though each step of the way in our struggle, we kind of banter back and forth or take the liberty to poke at each other, which is the same thing we see when we see Pete Wilson vetoing and saying, no, I'm going to make you less than. We're right, and you're going to be the wrong one in this. And we kind of do that. Fortunately, we kind of box our way out of that. And my message to Pete would be, you know, we're here, we're queer, and there are plenty more of us coming.
Get used to it.
And we're going to vote, and you better get used to it. And, you know, we've got a new perception about who we are. So,
well, it's an interesting notion of, I was going to ask you about the same notion that we're exploring of steps. Our community is taking these steps, and not all at the same time.
Right.
But the more examples you see, you know, you go to the PTA meeting and there's another couple there.
Right.
You didn't even know them. You know, and another gay couple or lesbian couple. And now we say, okay, I am going to allow my community to embrace whoever it is individually. You have kids, I won't have kids. You be in a couple, I won't be in a couple. Whatever it is. And we'll be part of the community and we'll accept that, but we will not be criticizing each other, right? Is that a kind of a movement that you've seen? Mm-hmm.
Which I do think is, as you mentioned before, that the maturing of the larger gay and lesbian community, I believe and hope, is allowing for more options. That it's not, you just have to be the party-hardy, you know, young, attractive gay or lesbian person out there. That there's just, you can be coupled, you can be singled, you can, the desire for children without it somehow being a threat or being seen as a cop-out, that you're taking over the hetero, sexist kind of ideals. And that's what I've heard a lot. Right. And yet there's just a growing number of people who are sort of saying, but it feels real good to be a couple, it feels real natural and important to go out and be a parent. And doing tremendous things to become a parent, especially for gay men. I just want to get back to something that you said. I've been thinking about it. For gay men to be parents, there's no mistake. And they have to do tremendous amounts of soul searching, tremendous amounts of hiring attorneys, without question. Oftentimes consulting with psychologists or social workers. I'm doing a lot of effort. So I wonder for gay men who are parents and are couples, what the divorce rate would look like. I mean, this is just something I have to wonder about. Would it be the same as for heterosexuals? I know a lot of heterosexuals think long and hard about being parents, but oftentimes not the same amount of energy that it would take for a gay man or for a lesbian.
You're assuming that the fact that there are children involved in this union is going to make a difference on whether people stay together or not, and I think maybe 20 years ago, 10 years ago even, that was the case. But I'm finding that, and certainly in my practice, less and less, because the pendulum has swung. And now psychologists and psychiatrists are telling us you don't stay in a bad relationship, and you're going to do more damage to your kids if you do that, than you separate. So
yeah, but you know what, Bobby, we get
a
different messages about that than our straight friends do. When our straight friends are in a marriage, and one of them says, you know, I'm not really very happy in this marriage, I bet you, and I know, it's my experience, people say to them, well, but you know, you really ought to talk about it, etc. In our community, not always, and then none of this is absolute, but in our community there's a lot more encouragement not to stay together. You're not happy, you know,
Right.
I mean, we don't even respect.
Yeah, that's the word, respect. There is less, traditionally, there has been less respect in our community for our own relationships and our own family units. But I think even that is changing. Mm-hmm. And what we are seeing is, all right, so we have the Hawaii case, and maybe we're going to be able to get married legally somewhere, or certainly within the next 1 or 2 decades. But what are we doing right now? We are getting married. Mm-hmm. It's not a legal marriage, but we're getting married. Our rabbis, our priests, our reverends, they're performing these ceremonies all the time. Right. They are unions, and the people who participate in them are very serious about them. As far as they are concerned, they are married, and they don't care what the state says.
Well, let's talk about Hawaii for a minute, because there are some differences in what the state says if they were to condone our marriages. Certainly there'd be differences in our expectations. We don't know whether, I mean, we could have step-parent adoptions if we could marry, maybe, although there would still be that other person, you know, involved, we guess. We're certainly exploring new ground here. Community property would be a big change. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I know when their relationship breaks up, the more wealthy partner goes, oh, I'm so glad there's no community property. I don't have to give that person anything, you know, which I think is very irresponsible.
Spousal support, child support.
Right.
Or shared custody with the children.
Right.
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 Well, with the adoptions right now, although we haven't done any great deal of, nothing's gone up to the appellate level, but with the adoption, if in fact you have two legal parents, even without benefit of marriage, that will give the either parent, even if one's biological and one's the adoptive parent, either parent can come in and petition the court, the family law courts, to determine a custody suit.
Mm-hmm. So what do we get if we marry? We get the property?
We get benefits and responsibilities.
We get
And
civil rights.
Yes, why is
We get
that,
to be
Stephanie?
equal.
Explore that for me.
Because we're equal. I mean, this is the last bastion. This is what they hold out. This is what we can't have. And if we have that, you know, as I said before, there's not the heterosexual privilege any longer. They don't get to make us the less than.
They're arguing that if we're allowed to marry, it's going to somehow diminish the value of heterosexual marriage. I heard that in the assembly, not 2 days ago. I mean, I can't imagine. That's the dumbest argument I've ever heard.
Well, they're faltering, and you know they're trying to come up with something stronger, you know. But I think, you know, even in looking at this, you know, I was going to say to you a while back, I think it's really interesting that the religious right and the radical right, who had no use for our African American communities, you know, they want to move as far out on a limb and as far away from us as they can get. They are now coming down in our African American community to make alliances with our churches, which are always considered the cornerstone of our community, and certainly an institution that we are at odds with. And they further want to come down and drive that stake between our families and turn our churches against us firmly, which pushes us farther away when we start looking at the notion of family. So as we're trying to create our own family, they're fighting and even disenfranchising or separating us from our legal families, you know. So
Well, they even used
it's
black
interesting.
ministers to come up and testify against our bills.
Oh, yeah.
Fervently about how we're not human and we're not a real
right.
minority.
Right.
You know, as though I know they weren't in Birmingham in 1963 when the white ministers were standing in the doors of churches saying, you're not human, get out of my church.
Right.
Bible says, you know, races should never mix. I think it's important for people to see how these things are similar and how denying someone the ability to form a family legally is the same as saying you're not human. And if you're not human, we can discriminate against you.
Treat you anyway.
Destroy you in some ways.
And destroy your own esteem. Well, how do our own parents respond to this too? I mean, they grew up in a world where they learned traditional family values and tried to pass them on.
I think it's very difficult for most parents initially, unless they came to the recognition much earlier than their own child, which oftentimes happens.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think that probably from the experience and talking with so many people in our community, that parents usually do come around. They might not embrace their child's lifestyle, but they still love their child, and it may take them a while to get there. But I think eventually they do get there, and some come to some kind of an uneasy truce. Some of them join parents and friends of gays, and some of them just treat it like, well, okay, fine.
It's interesting, I'm sorry, with the gay dads I've been interviewing, when they talk about how their parents are responding to their being parents and sort of the controversial or fascinating way that they're becoming parents, so far it's been unanimous. They're thrilled that the parents are just so excited to have grandchildren And in some cases, it is their first and only grandchild. So, I mean, it's who knows how this is going to affect the coming out process for families, for children, for everybody, with the aspect of that the option of being a parent is no longer having to be exercised, no longer having to be completely cut off. That is just a part of the human experience, part of the human option.
But these, I would imagine, are parents who have already grappled with the issue of their child being gay in the first place, and as soon as they found out, the parent probably says, "Oh, I'm never going to be a grandmother."
That's right, exactly.
So that
First
parent
year.
is where we were as a community 15 years ago.
So what?
And then when they find out they are going to be a grandparent, they are delighted because they know that their son can be a wonderful, loving, warm, affectionate father.
And it
What
seems
about
for
the
some
parent
people
of
that's
the-
all they need.
What about the
they
parent
need
of the
that.
non-biological parent, if you know what I mean? Do they feel like a grandparent to that kid that's the other one's biological kid?
My experience
mother
has
does.
been that it hasn't been that way. And when you talk in terms of parents saying, maybe I'm not comfortable with your orientation, but you're my kid and I love you, and you having that sense that the parent is really there for you and loving, has not been my experience. Now, my mother has passed away a few years back, but I had a very serious discussion. I vowed that I would not let my father leave planet Earth without us talking about this issue. And it was a very painful situation. My father's mother happens to be a lesbian. So he was like, bookends. I mean, you know, where do I go? He's checking, you know, himself. So, but he has problems with that. He has problems. And I keep saying, well, maybe time will be the great healer, and we'll move on from there, and it'll get better, and we'll come together. Haven't seen it yet. Late breaking news at 11. But, you know, I'm hopeful.
So they didn't
But-
have a relationship with Sandy or with her
The
daughter?
relationship is that they knew her, they knew them. We went along. What really drove the stake is when Sandy and I decided to have a holy union, and we were going to validate our relationship and commitment to each other. And this brought out all the Bible verses. My father, who was, everything was okay except when it came, now it was me. It was different. This is the father who gave me an autographed book from Rita Mae Brown, his friend, you know. And all of a sudden, yeah, Dad, and I'm a lesbian too. You know. So it changes. I'm hoping he's going to evolve, you know. But it's crazy. So I think within my community, I experience it more in the greater gay and lesbian community, that parents become real accepting and hey, you're my kid, bottom line. My experience has been a little different. And then if you've got them down thumping the Bible and all the right coming in saying, hey, nay, nay, you know, it makes it difficult for people to move beyond those positions that they've taken.
So how about your kids? Do they have a bunch of grandparents?
They actually do. If you talk about Nick, who is the grandson we adopted, he has, well, he has three. Well, he doesn't, it's kind of hard to explain, and he has a lot of fun with this, but our adult children are his aunts and uncles biologically, but now legally they're the brothers and sisters, and he has more grandparents than Heinz has pickles, and he has a relationship with his biological father and his biological mother, and he just, I don't know as a 7-year-old how he puts it all together, but he has, and the school's very supportive, and he just has a wonderful time with it all.
Well,
But
you know, there
yeah,
are times in our community when a lesbian couple will decide that they want to have a child, but they want the sperm donor not to be a sperm donor. They want to be a gay couple, and they're going to have 4 parents of this kid, and we're all going to bring them up together. And the question is, how's this child going to respond? And the answer is, he'll get twice as many presents and be really happy.
And that's his package.
Absolutely. But the
You know?
interesting, if you want to go back to a minute to the policy that Governor Wilson actually vetoed, the last part of the policy, if I remember it correctly, said nothing herein is to say that any child can have 3 legal parents. So they did address that issue very clearly in the new policy that's been rescinded. So as an attorney, I wonder if right now I could push through an adoption where there were 3 parents.
You know, if we were Martian anthropologists, we would say, if the human race was really smart, they would let people contract to be parents in any number, in any group. Because if a child is loved, that child can only do better by being more loved and more loved. And that's why we have aunts and uncles and grandparents, etc. And certainly legal responsibility would really help.
I was just thinking my own experience. As a small kid, my dad was married 3 times. I was from his second wife. I grew up, genealogy was just something that it was what I understood. It was very simple for me to understand. And I grew up understanding steps, halves, this, that, or whatever. It just was so easy because I grew up with it. I think it's the same thing that we're talking about here from the point of view of a child. Growing up with same-sex parents or 2 couples, though I think a lot of people think that must be detrimental because it seems so odd and weird for me, the adult, to comprehend. The reality is most children, if given love, support, guidance, all these just basic necessary things that a parent should give or parents should give to any child,
the healthy
they're fine.
the healthy set of serial families that we find after divorce?
Oh, all the
sometimes.
time. And heterosexual families. This is nothing new. I am doing divorces now for people. I'm working on their 4th divorce, and there's lots of children. But what I have found with children in my practice, and it's exactly what you're talking about, if that child is loved, if you're giving those children the right message, we care about you, we're here for you,
Yes.
don't pay any attention to what we do, we've messed it up, but that has nothing to do with how much we love you and we're going to be here for you. Those kids are going to be fine. You talk about some of the craziest, on the face of it, custodial arrangements in the world, and the kid's doing great. Why is the kid doing great? Because the mother and the father think this is the greatest custody plan in the world, and that's how the child feels.
And they love the
they're
kid.
secure.
They love the kid.
Well, I wonder whether marriage will make a difference in the way people see us, our own families, for instance. I wonder how your dad, of course this would have been yet another thing to cope with, but supposing the state had said, no, we think this is okay, because we're going to allow them to marry. And instead of it being an alternative, commitment ceremony, we're not domestic partners. We're having a wedding, a real wedding. And the state is going to say, these people are married, and Stephanie can adopt and be a co-parent, a real legal co-parent of this young woman. Maybe.
Because there's a country right now that recognizes and performs same-sex couple marriages, but one of the rights the same-sex couple does not have is to adopt a child. So who knows what's going to happen here? We don't know.
Well, the country probably does it for itself as much as it does it for us. This notion of security, that the family unit is a unit of security in a country.
Well, I think what's so unique about the marriage situation in Hawaii is they actually have a bill that says that you cannot discriminate on the basis of gender. So to have a legal marriage established within that state is going to be different than what we experience in Amsterdam, where it's similar but different, in that they don't have the right to adopt. And I think that, speaking to what you asked earlier about what if this happened and the states did sanction this, I think it would expedite the get used to it period, or the get over it period, because even the Bible tells you to obey the laws of your land. So those who are caught in that crux now have, I guess, a little freedom to then embrace members of their family that they shut out before, because they are in fact obeying the laws of the land. So
in certain states it was against the law for a long period of time for a black to marry a white.
absolutely.
Now it's no longer against the law. And there are still some people who will see a mixed racial family walking down the street and look and may have some feelings about this. But you know what? Get used to it. This is it. And we'll get there too.
And there's a culture
We'll
developing
get
around
there
that also.
too.
Sorry, would you?
I just said there's a culture. There are more and more people who are marrying across
religious lines. Racial lines. Absolutely.
And I think we have a certain cultural sophistication in that, like you said, we may have feelings about it, but
That's right.
we don't act on those feelings. And that's all with being politically correct and our demeanor in the workspace and leave your prejudices at home.
Right, but if the law is taken as an expression of the opinion of morality in the state,
Which always lags 20 years behind what's really happening in
but once
society.
it's there, it says, you know what, this is a good thing. This is what happened with contraception,
Right.
which was totally excoriated, with very much of the same language that we hear about ourselves now. You know, the devil's work, all kind of non-reproductive sex. Contraception,
Right.
abortion, and us were always excoriated. Now public opinion has changed. The law allows it, so it's okay. And I think that this is the place where we find the reason for the greatest barriers. They don't want us to have it because once we have it, if we are legal, then we will be okay.
But we bring a different sensitivity to it. I mean, just being a lesbian and dealing with the attitudes, the adverse attitudes, the knowledge that there are people that are thinking that I'm less than, and getting beyond that to embrace my full expression of who I am and realizing that I am not less than for gay, lesbian reasons or black-white reasons. I bring a certain quality of life experiences into my parenting situation. I bring a victory of getting over the BS and knowing that there's light at the end of the tunnel and moving ahead and waking up in the morning and saying, damn it, this world is mine too. And going out and taking on the day.
You know, I'm going to close the show with that because not only are we out of time, but it's a wonderful expression. I want to thank all three of you. I want to thank you for watching. It's been interesting. It's been wonderful. The future, I think, is ours. And what I say to you and the rest of the world, get used to it.